Alright, let's see what we can do here in the new year. I'm going to be stamping a scene in memory for someone that liked a lot of nature things, as I've been told. The ocean, the mountains, eagles, deer, not deers. And let's see what we can come up with in regards to that. I'm going to try something, just, I don't know, a little bit of a tweak on some of the things that I typically do in my scenes, and I'll talk about that when I get into it. But what I'm thinking about here is kind of a grassy slope right here. And then we'll be overlooking a lakeside type of situation. I want to use some of the designs that this individual is purchasing so that they can see yet another application of how they can use the stamps paired with each other in that theme. Okay, now this has been stamped down. I'm missing a little bit of this down here, but as always, you just kind of repeat your forms, and then you can always extend whatever imagery or theme you're going after. Yes, my finger is it's not in a splint. I cut it a little bit over the holidays, very stupidly. Okay, just kind of layering this down a little bit. I think I'll just leave that as is right in there. I could fill it in with some more mounds of grass or whatever, hills, whatnot, hill forms, or maybe more specifically. Okay, so what is that? That's about 3 impressions of this little grassy hillside here. Okay, I think I might use this again for some other things. Okay. And maybe I'll go with the Lakeside Cove. Maybe I'll go with the smaller version. Kind of a little set back a little bit farther. I'm not really sure. I could go with this one. I don't know. Why not start off the new year with the Lakeside Cove? It's one of my go-to stamps. Use it all the time. It's one of my first designs that I've done, or did, when I started this company. And I've never grown tired of it. It's, I don't know, it's just, one of the favorites. I always say to myself, if you design something right, and if you really take the time to do it and don't rush the design, and you get all of the components right, you won't have feel the need, at least, to redo anything. Alright, now, with this design right here, what I've done is, I didn't color in this portion right here, because I'm going to have an open area. When I have a closed area, or if it's more of a nighttime type of scene, I use that tone in there. So the tone's there for you to use, but if you don't want to use it for certain applications, then you just don't color it. So it's a little bit more universal that way when you do kind of selective coloring. If I don't color in these reflections down here, then it could be a meadow or something like that, or you can even just use the rocks if you don't color the trees in, you know. If I didn't color the trees, I wouldn't do the reflections either. But it can just be a row of rocks. So use the designs in a manner in which it's the most conducive for whatever usage you're kind of employing the stamp in. All kinds of different things. It could just be rocks in water. It could be rocks in a meadow, rocks in dirt, whatever. or just the trees sometimes. It could just be a row of trees in the grass. Don't even have to do the rocks. So one of the nice things about scenic stamping is just the amount of editing that you can do as far as the application of stamps go. Okay, now I colored this up in black and some green, and I put a little bit of green highlight in it. So I don't know if this shows up in the camera very much, but you can see the black down here, but there's some variation of green. Sometimes people stamp it in black and then they color green around it, so there's this kind of green glow. And I mean, that looks okay, but you know, when it comes to impressions, if you want something just to be green, I find it easier just to color on the stamp those trees green, and then it'll stamp out in the green like that. These aren't kind of outline designs where there's an open area in which you stamp it out and fill in the outlines. These are solid, kind of more silhouette based. So all you have to do is just color it in accordingly, and it'll stamp out in that color. Okay, it's a little bit of a different kind of mindset and technique to a lot of different styles of coloring, which are more of that outline kind of coloring book style of having something and then which you color in everything. Okay, so see this right here. I'm just going in, and I colored it black because sometimes if I just do the rocks black and the trees green or something like that, there's this kind of disconnect between those two areas. So see right down here, I'm also coloring in some of the trees down here. It doesn't come out as just straight green because it's a fusion of, it's a mixture. We're actually mixing in some of that green into the black, so I get a nice fusion. So there's this oscillation and kind of a natural blending of those two different colors. Okay, now I'm going to stamp this again out here, but we're going to have to mask off this grassy area right in here, and I'm just going to do it like this. Okay, I don't do a lot of super careful masking. For me, it's not really needed in this system of stamps. I've designed these stamps to where I don't have to do a lot of careful masking. It's not really, I don't mind masking, but it's just not really one of those types of things that I really consider to be terribly fun in the usage of the designs. So I try to design the stamps where there's kind of a minimal amount of that's ever really needed. Okay, so we have that lake over here, and let's put in some background trees in here, okay? And let's do it kind of in the same manner, but maybe let's go in a lighter tone, okay? So that was done in black and green. Let's try this. Let's try kind of more of a, just a neutral green. It's like a Christmas green or something like that. And let's go back with this pen here. This is an olive. I mean, you can just ink up your stamp in, you know, another color. Oh, I don't know. Looking around on my desk here, here's bamboo leaves, Memento, something, you know, kind of a piney green or an olive green would be good. But if you have multiple tones of green, you can try just doing some color blending like this on your stamps. I like the Marvy 1500 series pens just because of the that really wide tip amount, like brush marker like that. They're really nice to use, and it's one of those pens that a lot of people had back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you know, we colored all of our stamps that way. people had, you know, the dual tip pens too, the La Plumes and Tombos. And I don't know, I think a lot of that type of coloring's kind of been lost over the years. People have been used to stamping things out and filling in again, you know, which is a great look too. Alright, now what I did was I blotted that off and I stamped it back in there. And then I wiped off some of the bottom, okay? I have some videos on that kind of technique, you know, it's just, I don't know, it's instead of just inking it up like so. Let's go for some multiple variations of tone. Let's go ahead and use that bamboo leaves, but what I'm doing right here is I just take a paper towel and I'm going to change the amount of ink that's being applied. So there's more ink up top, and the transitions, there's a little bit less ink. I wiped it off kind of lightly from the bottom, but then I wiped off the bottom even more, so it's going really dry down here and wet up there. Okay, so when I stamp it over the top of these trees, I mean, I could just stamp it out with a full impression of this, but I'll show you what it looks like when I wipe it off like that. It's a subtle change, okay, so it's going from darker, but do you see where that kind of fades out down there? So as it fades into my foreground right here, well, this is really the foreground, but the closer trees like that, it doesn't have as strong of a value in this area, so we can still see a nice silhouette of these trees, okay? And that's why, I mean, I could stamp that in, you know, black back there, but it would be better if I transition it into more of a gray, okay, because there's a lighter tone. So, I mean, I can physically use a gray color to stamp it out like that, but you can also use just drier versions of whatever ink you're using, okay? Or you can do both. In this case, I'm going with a lighter color and a drier one, okay? So we get that full silhouette impression. I like that color right there, that bamboo leaves. Okay, so let's just do that. And I'll do it in the reflections as well, okay? So this is an easy technique right here. You know, people say, oh my god, you make it look so easy. Well, it's because I use easy techniques. You just have to employ them. And I'm saying that because I know every one of you can ink up a stamp and then just wipe this off, okay? You just don't want to wipe it off completely, and then there's no ink down there, and it's just a complete wet and dry right there, okay? So you kind of go with a dry paper towel. You don't go with a wet one. A wet one would remove off all the ink. So just use easy techniques, okay? Easy methodology, and you'll be fine. Okay, see how that really kind of transitions in here? Okay, so one thing that's really fun too is reflections when you're talking about a lakeside type of situation. Let's stamp this. It's not going to be a perfect mirror impression, but who cares? Okay, so see, we'll go like that. And let's go for, let me see, so I did 1, 2, let's go for a third impression, okay? Like this. I'll just mask that off right here. Easy techniques, simple techniques. I think the simple, easy techniques are sometimes the most effective, right? When you're employing easy techniques too, it's just it doesn't, you know, easy doesn't have to mean fast either. I mean, this doesn't have to be a long technique either, but I don't know, sometimes I just feel that the easiest ones, you know, are the ones where when you're employing them and utilizing them within your pieces, they're just a kind of a more of a natural harmony in the end result, because you're not fighting against given techniques and whatnot. Tedium, you know, and that's where things like, for me, kind of an abundance of masking would kind of interfere a little bit. I mean, I can do it, but I don't know. I'd rather not, if it was all the same. Okay, so closer, objects are darker. As we move back in the distance, they're typically lighter. Similar objects, I'm saying, okay? So one of the things I'm going to do here is with this cloud stamp, I'm going to stamp it in blue, okay? And a light blue dye-based ink over darker impressions like this. If I stamp that right over the top of those, it's not as if a transparent color is going to look like it's in front of things, even though I am stamping it over the top of them, okay? Transparent colors, it's just the darker color is always going to look closer, okay? Let me see, I think I have something on this stamp here. There's something on my cloud here. Okay, let's read that. This is a Memento Summer Sky. It's a very light blue. Okay, cloud stamps right here. One of the techniques that I like to employ is, it has that tone around there for a reason, but I'm just going to do one layer of them. And if you want to kind of reference this cloud stamp, you can go to our website and bring up 018E as far as the imagery goes, and there's tons and tons of lessons using this cloud stamp, but there's also a dedicated lesson on it. But all I've done is I've kind of wiped around the edge. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm kind of employing that methodology of doing partial impressions. And even though I'm not just kind of toning off a specific, like a specific area, like a tree or a piece of rock or something like that, you can kind of just tone out an area like this and just make it lighter, okay? So see, sky images are all rectangles, but in the line for the most part. So if you just kind of blot off the edge where you're overlapping cloud into cloud, it'll blend in so much more kind of eloquently, harmoniously, whatever. I mean, I don't have to do this kind of blotting off around it, especially in this kind of really light color like this. But if you do, it's just so much softer looking. See that right there? The summer sky is really, really light. I need to adjust my camera here a little bit. I kind of overexpose a little bit early on in these scenes because I'm working on a white piece of paper, so everything's really dark because it's exposing for a really light, area. But anyways, that summer sky is very light though. See that right there? And now, what do we do in the water? We can come in like this with the water, and I turn my cloud, I stamp it this way up here. All I do is I flip it upside down like that, and I put an image like that into the water like that. Look at that. And then we have this kind of reflective situation here. Okay, so that's my foundation right there. What is this? This is 1, 2, 3, 4 stamps right here, and that filled up a half page, 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece, which is fairly large. It's it's double the size of your typical card size piece, quarter size piece. Okay, let's see here. Alright, let's go on and start coloring in. How do you color in now? Well, this is glossy cardstock. You could be doing this on a matte cardstock too, but I'm going to add in some greens and blues. Alright, I think that'll harmonize with this general piece right here. I'll bring in some other tones as well. Maybe some desert sand I happen to have. I don't have every color of every, line of inks out there, okay? So I just took a look over at what I have, here's some peeled paint. Oh, here's that bamboo leaves. We'll use that again that we used in here. Oh, antique linen looks good to me. Browns, greens, blues in this color scheme, okay? If I'm going for a deep sunset, then I would use, I probably would have stamped out, these images in different colors, okay? This one's just going to be like a high noon scene or something like that. And, I don't know, nice, bright, sunny, I don't know, spring, maybe. Yeah, let's make it spring. Okay, so let's start off. This always happens to me. Oh, here we go. Couldn't find the lid for this one. Desert sand. Okay. All right. Let's see. This is just a stylus tool. You can use a paper towel or anything to blend things into your scenes too. This is going to be very, very light because desert sand is inherently light, okay? But I don't rush through these lighter tones because they provide a foundation for my darker tones, and these colors are transparent, okay? Dye-based inks are transparent, so this color, even though I might blend over, a lot of colors over the top where you won't really be able to see straight desert sand anymore, it'll still affect the overall piece and adding to the kind of end result intensity and richness. Okay, I'm adding some of this over my rocks. I'm leaving some of my rocks a little bit light, and the things that you retain, that you remain light, ends up being the lighting that's hitting your scene, okay? So we're defining light through the use of shadow, which means that I just don't color everything in. And that's one of the differences coming from kind of more of the coloring style of images, stamping images and coloring them in. The only difference is that, see, if this was a rock right here, people are used to coloring in whole areas, like outlines, like a stained glass, and here's all these separate little areas in which to fill in completely, okay? Sometimes people give a little bit of a vignette around something, but this one right here is when I'm coloring in, okay, so this is a grassy area, and people that first start doing scenic stamping, you can certainly do it this way, but they'll fill in this whole area. They'll see this whole area as something to color in completely. The only difference is between that and kind of more of a lighting situation is that you just don't color everything out. So see these little knolls here? I'm going to leave those white. Well, I might put a little bit of color just so they're not so stark white, but I'll leave them lighter so I just don't color everything out. Okay, now this doesn't have to be a hard type of lighting type of situation either in terms of theory. If you just look at the images themselves, there are darker areas on the images, the rocks in here for example, and what I'm doing is I'm just coloring in those areas that are darker in the design, okay? And I'll leave the areas that are lighter in the design just as is. So there's lights on here. I just leave those lighter, and those top areas of those rocks, it's always on the top area of the rocks, I'm just leaving them as is. I might put a little bit of color into it. I don't avoid them completely, but by and large. Okay, so just every time you move up and do another color, just retain, those light areas, and that will read as light. Okay, it's just, there's no really harder kind of situation then in that. It's made easy because it's in the designs themselves. I take a lot of time on the designs when I'm working on them to really develop my shadows. And that's what's, that's what when I look for designs for myself, when I'm buying designs other, I use other stamps than Stampscapes. in my personal collection. But what I look for in designs that I'm going to utilize with Stampscapes, I buy a lot of designs that have really defined textures and shading, and if they don't have that, I usually don't buy them. I could use them with Stampscapes, and they work fine, but it puts more work in my lap because I have to define the lighting and shade myself, you know, through tone. I'd rather it be inherent in the design. The more kind of developed designs that you get with your designs, if those areas aren't developed, it means that every time you utilize them, you're going to have to do them yourselves. In my opinion, as a designer, that should be in the designs inherently, because, you know, a rubber stamp is a replication device, so if the designer puts in the work in the design itself, forever, the hundreds, thousands, whatever amount of times that design is going to be used, if you get it into the design, then every time that the stamp is replicated, you're taking the work out of it for the individual. And in some cases, that's me, you know, because I'd rather not have to do that if I don't have to. Okay, so there's some greens in here. You can see where those areas of light are being retained there. This is too green though, okay? So I'm going back into it with a walnut stain. In greens, I like to bring browns, okay, because it kind of gives it an earthier hue, tone. Okay. Now bring that into there like so. See that how it's kind of more of an olive green kind of look when you bring that brown into it. Okay, I'll need to bring in a little bit more, but I just keep layering it until I get what I want. And when I kind of take it in a nice incremental way like this, I have a lot of control over it because I can see it kind of coming into focus slowly. Alright, that was walnut stain. The distress inks are all, that was kind of a darker distress ink in terms of the kind of more of that brown tone-ish look, but they're all kind of pale in value. They're supposed to be, you know, they're kind of real earthy and weathered looking, which I love that about them, but I like getting a little bit darker sometimes, so I'll have to move into some darker tones. I mean, there might be a darker brown tint than that. I haven't looked lately, but okay, so going in with this brown right here. This is a Marvy brown. It's not a super dark brown, but it's a fairly bright brown. And we'll just kind of layer that in there. See, I don't come with this color a lot. I'm doing this color a lot, so I'm using the drier version of it, just like I do drier versions of the stamps a lot of times for lighter impressions. Right here, in a sense, I'm getting lighter impressions with this brown because I've wiped it off a few times and I keep utilizing that drier portion of it. Okay? And that way, there's a lot of control over it. There's not a lot of unexpected types of things that develop in terms of a mark when I'm working so kind of methodically like this. Okay? This is a darker brown. Okay? I think these browns within the greens in grass, it just it takes on a more kind of a, I don't know, a realistic, I don't know, I'm hesitant to use that word, but I don't know, there's just less of a kind of a electric brown feel, green feel to it. You know, I don't want like a day glow green grassy field right there. But as I'm going with this, I'm thinking to myself, that's a little bit too brown right there, okay? It looks like California, except it'd be less green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten it up a little bit with a little bit of a brighter green, okay? It's not going to lighten it up, okay? Because once it gets dark, you can't really make it lighter, but I can make it a little bit brighter, though, in intensity by going over it with a nice intense green. See that little tinge of green right there? It's just kind of adding a little bit of character into it now. It's a little bit warmer. I don't know, the peeled paint could have been used too if you don't have like this green like this. Peeled paint, though, it's a little bit more dull because, again, it's, you know, the distressings are supposed to be kind of weathered and aged looking. So I like it in conjunction with that. I like the pairing of them. Sometimes I like, you know, a more earthy kind of aged look. But I also like the intensity in some areas, so I just use them both and I layer them on top of one another. It doesn't have to be in one or the other type of thing. And see this, we have a nicely developed area like that. Doesn't it seem kind of nice and rich in terms of the tones? Okay, so let's move on here. Kind of getting used to using this or avoiding it with my finger right here. Sorry if it's getting in the way of seeing things, or, you know, clearly. Let's try some Memento London Fog. Okay, let's use some of this over these trees, and I'm going to develop. Oops, I just cleaned off my stylus tools, so they're super wet still. I didn't drain out the ink. I mean the water real good. Okay, I'm going to go into my water a little bit, and I like to anchor my objects into the scene a little bit more with color, okay? So there's shadows down here in the water. Okay, some of them are reflections, but you can see there's a higher concentration of ink, you know, dark ink at the base of these rocks. So all I'm doing here is I'm just coming into it and I'm adding some more tone, okay? I have this on its edge, so I'm just doing this a real thin application of this ink, okay? Kind of at the base of the rocks and in the water a little bit. So, you know, I'm coloring outside of the lines for sure. But that's what you can do. You can, you know, coloring outside the lines, kind of breaking those boundaries of the shapes will add to the overall continuity of the piece. You know, because you're bringing in common tones with one another. See that kind of streakiness in the water right there? Right? It's not real apparent right now because this London Fog is a very light color, but again, I might make this look easy because I go with a very easy methodology, okay? It's really super light there, so I can just see it. So it's kind of giving me a little bit of a taste on kind of the marks I want to do that are more distinct, okay? So let's move into a more distinct color, okay? Let's go into this Bahama Blue right here. It's kind of moving into your, from a very super light value to kind of a mid value right here, but let's utilize our same tip right here, okay? That'll be that color right there, all right? Bahama Blue is this color right here if used in its straight form, but when I ink it up like this is a sponge right here, so when I go like that, it's a much lighter version of it, and that's what you want to utilize, okay? With whatever methodology you're using, or applicator, you can do this. I can take a wadded up paper towel, and it could be as easy as this, okay, right here. You go like that, and you ink it up, okay? I like to kind of get, this is kind of like you're making your own little paintbrush, and then you're just kind of, it's almost like you're finger painting this in, okay? It's this little swiping motion like that. You see that color right down there that's being applied? It's a little, just a touch of blue, but that's the blue that I'm applying with this, okay? Go like this, right here. You're not going with a big slathering of a super dark color, okay? It's just a really light version of it. Some people do this and they go like this, one swipe, and it's like, oh, I can't see anything, so so I need to ink up. Because they're used to using real full versions of everything, like coloring in with an ink pen, and that green right there is that green. What I'm doing is I'm taking the versions of all these different inks, and I'm using very light versions of them, like that. And then I'm developing them a little bit more and getting darker versions, okay? And that way it's a nice, super easy approach, but think about it though. When you do it this way, you are really extending the color potential of every one of your inks, because you're taking them from a very light version of that ink, and you can work it all the way into the most saturated version of it, the full version of it, by just utilizing it and layering it until it reaches that full kind of intensity of it. A lot of times I don't even use the full intensity of something though. I just kind of use the, the lighter versions of it. And no, this is not hard, okay? But it does require a little bit of a tweak on kind of the mindset of coloring in things completely, okay? So here, I'll show you what I'm talking about right here. See these rocks right here? Now, see these rocks, how they're changing in tone? There's some greens, there's some blues in it, there's some lighter areas of the rocks. I just didn't color in everything, so I've left some light like that. And that reads as lighting on them. But it just, you define light just by not coloring them out, you know? In actuality, it's less coloring to create lighting, okay? So we didn't do anything. We didn't do some kind of subtractive process to reveal light. You just don't color everything in. And that's scenic stamping lighting right there. So when I'm teaching scenic stamping and I'm teaching lighting, all I'm doing is I'm just kind of putting the brakes on people. Don't color in like everything. Leave some areas light, you know, like that. And it's just looking at the designs. There's some darker areas on the designs, so you just kind of darken the darks and leave the lights light. If they're tonal designs, if they're outline designs, then you kind of have to define it yourself. Okay, so adding that in, like so, it's really fun to kind of watch your pieces develop like that. I'm bringing some of this blue into this grassy area right here, because when you bring kind of common colors into the different areas, you create kind of an overall cohesion in terms of similar colors being used. It might not look like the same color because you've used different amounts in different areas, but even so, it will lend itself to that overall continuity. Alright, now let's see here. I'm getting to a point right now on this piece that I'm starting to feel the need for some additional touches in here in terms of imagery. I don't like this down here, but I didn't intend to just leave it as is. I'm going to add some other things into it. Maybe I'll bring in a little bit of color to the sky. This is what I'm going to be doing that's a little bit different, for me at least, than what I typically do. I often bring in a lot of color into my sky, but one of the things that photo stamping has taught me is that sometimes it's cool to leave a lot of area kind of open up there. Alright, so I stamped that in the summer sky, those clouds, and I'm going to bring in some additional tone up there. I might have a little bit of green in this because I didn't clean this off completely, but that's okay. We'll have kind of a warmer blue. Okay, so I'm bringing some of this blue into my clouds. The cloud stamp itself is a little bit darker in some areas, like right in here. So I'm kind of toning that in the impressions down here, okay? Just a touch, okay? Just for a little bit of variation. And then I'll come up into the sky area like this. I'll bring in some extra color around these clouds. I'm going to leave a lot of it, though, as is. But see this right here? Where I kind of come up to the cloud. It kind of leaves somewhat of a defined area. Okay, so it makes that cloud stand out a little bit lighter by putting a little bit of tone around it. I mean, if I go really dark, it'll really make that stand out, but I want to leave this kind of more nice and airy this time. So I'll bring some of this tone up here, though. Okay, maybe in the two corners right here, and I'll leave this area kind of open. I want to have some much lighter skies, you know, daytime skies, and then things that I've been doing in some scenes, at least. I'm not talking about like nighttime scenes. And I just want to experiment around with that. Okay, I'll bring it down here in the water reflection as well. Okay. All right, so we have that, like so. It's kind of becoming, I don't know, a place I'd like to visit, I'd like to be at, and that's one of those things. And scenic stamping, I believe, scenic stamping, the whole process of creating things in our craft rooms is really fun. We really get lost in the process. You know, time seems to fly. And one of the things in scenic stamping, kind of a little bit of an added type of effect that happens is you can be kind of, I don't know, kind of emotionally or subconsciously transported to that location, you know, a natural location, which is kind of fun. Okay, let's add in some additional imagery in here. I'm going to layer this. I'm going to sandwich these little hills here, this knoll or whatever, between some trees. So I can put some trees like here, and then I can put some, you know, behind this little piece right in here, or something like that. You can do it however way you want. I can put this right here too, or whatnot, but we'll go with some different levels. I'll just maybe use the tops right here or so, and I'll come up here, maybe up here, like that. I don't know. We'll figure it out after my first impression. Let's see how it goes, and then we can adjust. Okay, so even though I'm going to be using just a portion of the stamp, I try to ink up more than I think I'm going to need. Okay. Alright, let's go with about like so. We are stamping kind of wet into, this isn't damp or anything like that, you know, but the pulp of the paper is, you know, a little bit coated, you know, or, you know, we're starting to saturate it with a little bit with some ink. It's not super saturated. It can sometimes, but sometimes you're stamping wet into wet, you know, with these last impressions right here over the top of all this. So I hold this down just so that ink transfers more, because when you're stamping kind of wet into slightly moist, if you stamp it down and you pull it up too fast, it's like a vacuum where it takes off, you know. The ink didn't transfer over, so it's like a vacuum and you're pulling the ink off. Alright, so something like that. Just a small little touch right there. I thought I was stamping a little bit higher up there, but that's alright. Alright, over here, let's come in with something like... I don't know, I might want to use like a bigger portion of that. I might go down this whole area right here, actually. I think that would look pretty good. Let's do that. I was just going to mask that off, but I think it'll look good with kind of a larger portion of this right here. Let's go with this. Okay, this is going to be a big impression. I always stand up when I'm going for the full impression. See, I'm kind of adjusting my... I don't put it too much on the tips right now, but down here is where you want to apply your pressure, where there's the mass of the area. Bigger stamps have more surface area, so you know, I kind of go left, middle, right, bottom, and then again, because I'm stamping this on to an area that's already received several layers of, you know, ink, I'm just going to let that transfer over a little bit. I don't know if I have to hold this down for this long, but you know, better safe than sorry. Okay, so we get that right there. Okay, it's a little unbalanced out here, so let's take this. Now this area right here, there's not a lot of ink, right? So I don't need to hold this down for too long. But see how I kind of move my hand like this? I'm adjusting my pressure. Okay, I get something like that. I think even a couple more impressions would look good. Let's just go for that couple trees right there. Let's move it up like this. Yeah, that looks better. It's a little bit more full, like that. Okay, I'm going to start doing some kind of more fine-tuning tweaks now, okay? Now, one of the things I mentioned in a recent video is when you stamp out your objects in whatever color it is, the darkest color that you happen to use, okay? In this case, it's black. So we're saying, when we do that, we're saying that the shadows within our scene are black, okay? So if I stamp out this in black, we're saying that the shadows are black, right? So I'm going to take black and develop these shadows a little bit more. Again, it doesn't have to be as black as this impression right here, because when I ink up my applicator like that, I mean, that's like a 20% gray or something like that. But then, I mean, I can develop it more, and we can move it into a 40% gray or something like that. It's never really terribly dark. I mean, if we're working with a super, super wet, juicy ink pad, then you might. But I've gone over that many, many times. I don't know, what was that, like 15 times? And that's like a, I don't even think that's a 50% gray right there. Okay, so that's how you get a lot of command and control over it. And let's just start toning in some of these little areas, like at the, you know, the base of these rocks right here. And by making some areas darker, okay, it doesn't necessarily, you're not doing it necessarily to make your scene darker, but when I do this around this rock right here, it makes the top of the rock seem lighter by contrast. So I'm kind of increasing the lighter areas one step lighter by making certain areas one step darker. So it just kind of anchors the scenes. It feels like it's sitting in that scene more because you're, introducing kind of opacity. You're saying that that object is casting a shadow. See that right there? I'm kind of just tapping this on its edge like that too. I mean, you can use that whatever, where my wadded up paper towel go, I don't even know where it is. You can just kind of tap it down in there like so if you want to. Just right at the base of objects. I mean, you can use darker colors too. You don't have to go with black, but I would typically work up into that black though. I would really encourage kind of the experimentation of it and utilizing black to achieve all of the grayscale tones. Okay, so like I said, 5% gray, 10%, 15, really get that and kind of get a mastery of your shadows and grayscale. When you do that, I feel that when you go back to color, or when you're using color, after you get a mastery of, the darkest color possible, black, it just makes your strengths, it'll strengthen your color usage after that with your kind of sensitivity towards value, because you can really utilize all of your colors so much more strategically that way. Okay, so see that right there? It's just kind of anchoring those rocks down to touch. Now let's do that right here in the foreground as well. It doesn't read as black, it's just kind of, you're introducing that black tone into that gray into these foreground little hills here, and that kind of gives it something in common with the black impressions back there. I'm touching that white area in there with my finger. I got it real smudgy. Well, we're going to use some white pigment ink in here anyway, so that shouldn't matter. I don't know. My fingers get inky. Okay, let's take a look in here. I don't know. I might be able to utilize a little bit more of a brighter blue here and there. I think, going in with let's go back to that Memento. Let's introduce a slightly more bright use of that. Okay, so you just let's apply a little bit more of it. Okay, think about like so. Let's get a little bit of that blue glow in there. That's kind of fun. See that? I just kind of add it, and it's going from something very, very light, and if I like it, then you just use more of it. Okay, you see, I'm kind of moving this around a little bit too, just so I'm not getting a hard tone of it like that. See, I'm kind of going more of a, like this type of thing. So I'm kind of coloring in area, a field of it, okay? Like this. I think that looks pretty good. See that slight blue tinge that's kind of being introduced in there? Let's bring a little bit back here in the shadows too. kind of doing a little bit of the well, I guess the four corners really of the piece. Try a little bit of paper towel. I try to use a little bit of the paper towel on all my videos these days because these stylus tools are no longer being manufactured, so as far as I know, unless someone else has taken over the clear snap manufacturing equipment. See this? I can just kind of take this and I'm just kind of blending that tone in like that. It's almost like finger painting or something like that. It's really kind of fun, though. I really enjoy it. I hadn't really done this for probably like 20 years or something like that using paper towels. But it actually works very, very well. Alright, see that right there? A little bit stronger brightness within the piece. Okay, let's go with a couple other impressions. So let's go a little bit more bold too here. I'm going with this Leafless Pine. Actually, let's not do that quite yet. Let's go in and utilize some of this. This is the thing that I was really looking forward to in my sky in terms of kind of playing around with kind of my methodology. A lot of times I would go a lot darker in the sky to really define those clouds. I'd stamp out those clouds a little bit darker, and then I'd make my sky a lot darker blue, but I wanted to go for more of an airy look and try some of those looks in here because I'm really enjoying playing around with the photo stamping where I'm going with some existing skies and stamping imagery over the top. But anyways, let's bring some of this. This is just white pigment ink, okay? And I'm bringing this into my sky area. Gotta kind of get rid of some of those little smudgy fingerprints for one thing. But let's bring some of this over the tops of some of my trees. And this is where I really love it, where light meets dark, okay? So I have this is really a light area up here because it's just all white. And I'm bringing this into my imagery, okay? Like that. So it's kind of like introducing light into it. It's one of those instances where you can really introduce light back into a scene, with pigment ink, because it's kind of a translucent white that we're introducing to that area. Now, a lot of times I'm much more careful because my scenes often get a lot darker than this, but since it's so light up here, it's really opened up some of the possibilities as far as the application of this goes. And in terms of the amount, I can really use a lot of it, and it doesn't look kind of weird. Now see, where I'm putting it down on some of these trees, some of the more distant trees, like even the black impression of this cove right here, I'll show you. I'll give you a close-up here in a minute. But I'm blotting this off over the top of this, and I think it really kind of pushes back those objects and impressions. It pushes them back into the distance. So we add a lot of depth. Now, I'm not doing it over, well, on this scene I'm doing it over quite a bit, but let's take a look at that now, okay? See those trees right back in there? I kind of came in like that. There's the impression of that grain, but over here it's much lighter because I've applied that ink over the top. Doesn't that feel like that? Doesn't it look like a kind of a hazy kind of mist or something like that? Like I said, keeping things really light up there has kind of opened up a lot of opportunities where I can kind of bring in a lot more of this touch application into the piece, and I think it looks perfectly natural to do that. Here's a real heavy usage of it right here. You know, when I go like that and I apply it, it's actually applying quite a bit. I can bring some of it down into my rocks too. Don't put it everywhere, you know, like let's just tone out the whole thing. I think it looks good when you oscillate it so there's a little bit of contrast. See, I put it back here, but you can leave some of this as is. I put a little bit right here. It diffuses it though, doesn't it? Okay, like we can bring it down here in this water and put some light onto these trees, huh? Some of these foreground trees. Like that. Okay, see that? See the difference in the impressions right there? So I kind of leave some crisp, or some areas of the tree crisp, but I kind of diffuse some other areas with just a little bit of pigment ink over the top. This is just the cotton ball. Look how deep and distant those trees look now. They look like they're in a cloud or something, to me. Okay, let's see what it looks like over here. I'm even putting a little bit over the top of this little knoll here. You might guess I have fun doing this. Here, I'll stop here. Anyways, that's what I was hoping that would happen here. We can kind of really develop those trees there in terms of the atmosphere, like that. I think that looks really good. I love deep space and kind of atmospherics in scenic stamping, and I love adding these types of little touches into the piece, going for depth, texture, all that good stuff. And that's just a really easy way of adding kind of a soft look to a piece. Okay, this is the Leafless Pine that I pulled out earlier here. This is a Versafine black pigment ink. Okay, oops. I think my tree's on really crooked here. Let's get that kind of straightened out. Okay, so let's add in kind of a taller element. It really pairs well with kind of the full pine trees. Look how beautiful that looks right there. In terms of depth, when you add something like that, something really tall into the mix, it kind of goes through the foreground, midground, and sky, so it kind of ties those areas together. And it provides some really great framing too. Tall, kind of bony elements. And this tree has been designed to really pair well with the existing designs in kind of a harmonious way. Okay. kind of 3 impressions of it. Let's go a little bit lower like this. One more. I love that. Let's put a little bit right over here. It's kind of hanging off the page mostly. Okay, so something like that. Kind of enhances the dead tree, the aged tree. Kind of enhances the living ones, you know, in terms of providing contrast with them. All right, now let's see. Let's get in some other imagery into this. I'm just going to do this kind of eagle out here. I put some pigment ink down. It probably would have been better to stamp that before, but let's add that in black. It'll stamp out lighter, but that'll be fine. Because I am going to be stamping it over a lot of the pigment ink. Okay, but let's see how it looks like that. Let's make that eagle a little bit lighter. Let me go for a little bit of variation. Even on these little small elements, you can kind of change the variation. I'm blotting off some of that ink on the wings. Maybe it'll stamp out lighter, where it's a little bit drier. Maybe it'll look like the lighting is on the wings. I don't know. It might stamp out just completely black too. I'm not sure, but let's see. I'm stamping it over pigment ink, which I don't really recommend. I should have stamped this before I applied the pigment ink up there, but I was eager to get to it. Yeah, good. Okay, so yeah, it's stamped out lighter, but it looks more distant that way too. I think I'm just going to go with that. I thought about a deer too. I pulled out the deer, but I think the eagle. That represents the individual like that. Soaring free, kind of loving nature, and whatnot. Okay. Now I got those little smudgies up there with my fingers, and that doesn't really bother me if this was my piece, but I'm giving this piece to someone, so I'm going to put in some additional imagery into there. Okay, let's go for an overhanging tree. Let's mix up our kind of foliage a little bit and introduce kind of a oak type branch into the piece. I'm not trying to I just want to kind of blend in those little smudgy finger marks with some additional texture. It doesn't have to, you know, cover them completely or anything like that. This puts us as a viewer underneath something, looking into the scene. It's what landscape photographers do. They position themselves, you know, if they're taking a picture of a mountain or something in the distance, they like to position something either in the foreground down low, some flowers or a little something, or underneath something so there's an overhanging tree limb to provide that framing and I don't know, kind of a reference point to distance, how close you are, whatnot. You're usually using real wide-angle lenses, you know, to do that type of kind of framing device. But anyways, it kind of capped things off nicely up there too. I guess that actually looks good, or better than leaving it open. I think that capped things off really nicely. All right, so we added in a lot of soft touches with that white pigment ink. Let's add in some crisp light touches with this is a white acrylic paint pen. It's I don't know how to pronounce that. Miaosun acrylic painter. Marks on anything. I found these work pretty good. I'm usually using white gel pens, but I just got this fairly recently, so I'm really testing this out here. And I don't know, I like what I see so far. This is a 0.7 pen, tip size. Okay, let's go in and add some highlights on some of these rocks. I mean, just adding in some light on the top of them. You know how I went in and added tone on the bottom of them for those shadows? Well, you can do the opposite with lighting. Okay, this is a light white pen, so I'm going in and adding highlights now on the top sides of those rocks. Dark on the bottom, light on top. Okay, so this is what this looks like close up here. There's little highlights like that in there. Looks kind of weird when you look at it close, you know, real super close up, but this is what it looks like, you know, at arm's distance, viewing distance. Some of my rock areas got a little bit dark in there, so maybe I won't put too much, or I'll just put like a dot sometimes. And, okay, that's kind of a texture going on in the distance right there. I like to bring it into my other objects within here. Some trees, I can put a few of the dots. It won't be real apparent because it's really a light area back there, but it's one of those subtle little things. I always say this, you know, if you give something to, oops, I'm smudging my my oak branches there. I put the oak branches in there to get rid of those little smudges, and I'm just smudging that. The Versafine black takes a little bit of time to dry, so let's go for another impression right over the top. So I'm getting my smudge impressions to get rid of smudgy fingers, and now I'm going on with some additional impressions to get rid of the smudges on the branches now. Okay, I need to be careful about that. It can be said that maybe I should have, you know, stamped all those types of impressions like last, so I wouldn't have to worry about them. Okay. All right. So where was I? I like to put in these little highlights on different parts. Am I working within the frame here? Okay. I'm just putting some little dots on some trees here. I don't have to be too careful because the whole area is fairly light, but if you give something to someone, you know, and they really kind of take their time to kind of take a closer look at these little things like this, they read from a distance as a whole, but it's kind of nice looking at something and seeing all these little touches that you've added into the piece to, I don't know, kind of animate certain little areas and specific objects, you know, for your recipient to enjoy, and I think it's something that's always really appreciated. Rewarding people for further inspection, closer inspection. That's one of those things we used to talk about in illustration in classes. You know, you want to kind of reward people for further inspection of your piece. You know, when people are flipping through you know, catalog or magazine, if you can get people to stop for a few seconds and think, oh man, that's kind of nice, you know, that's basically all you can kind of hope for. I mean, if they really stop and think, oh my god, that's so cool, that drawing or painting, you know, that you've done, then you've kind of achieved what you meant to. You know, a lot of times your illustrations were for things like magazines or, advertisements for products. So got to get people to kind of stop and kind of take notice. Okay, so I'm just enhancing those areas that I've retained the lighter areas of right up here. You can kind of read these as like little white flowers too, or something like that, or it could just be highlights like that. But look at that right there. And then as you look at it from arm's distance, it just kind of reads as, you know, kind of little textures or whatnot. Okay, now let's see what I have here. Let's go on here with, how about a pink, okay? This is just a pink gel pen, and what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of adding in these little pink little clusters and what says, you know, spring more than flowers, huh? So just kind of going in there and adding some of these on there. I kind of cluster it here and there. I mean, sometimes like wildflowers fill in like an entire hillside or something like that, but most of the times when I see them, they're in little clusters together. So I kind of put little patches here and there of them. Okay, so let's take a look at that. See those little touches of pink down there, right? Pink and green really harmonize well like that too. And then when you look at it arm's distance, it's really not that apparent, right? But then, upon further inspection, look at all those little textured tones down there, which are really fun. Let's put a little bit of orange in with that. Let's add a little bit of a touch of a warmer tinge. It doesn't read too much. I need like a more pastel orange, I think. This kind of neon one doesn't stand out against that. It's a little bit, not much. Alright, so anyway, I think we're just about done here. Let's take a look and assess. Alright. Little adjustments here and there. This scene came out pretty much the way that I had hoped for. Nothing in terms of specifics, though, okay? But I'm talking about more in terms of the overall feel, okay? I was hoping that the pigment ink, leaving this area much lighter than what I normally do, really allowed me to go pretty crazy with the white pigment ink. I love this kind of overall kind of airiness to the background, especially where we've really pushed back in distance-wise, visual distance, those trees. But it's more than just kind of just having those trees light. I could have stamped them lighter, but when you put them in that kind of diffusion of that mist, it takes on a different kind of kinesthetic feel. I think it's just different looking. It's like a hazy mist and I don't know, atmospherics. Going back, you know, so when we were allowed to use so much of that white pigment ink down there, I've used a lot more of it. A lot of times I apply that white pigment ink with a Q-tip, but having so much of it back in here, it really allowed me to add quite a bit to the foreground too, and down here and the reflections and whatnot. So anyways, fun stuff. I'm trying to learn all the time still, but kind of all of that diffusion back there and kind of the feel of those right there really contrast well against the darker, kind of real crisp imagery of the foreground like that. So everything's kind of working in harmony really nicely like that. And I don't know, it's really fun to do. Much more kind of experimentation to do with that, but I don't know. We'll do that with some more photo stamping as well. I really like that technique these days. I didn't experiment with it enough in the like the last 20 some odd years. So this is really fun to see some different looks and to always try to kind of push the boundaries even with existing techniques that you're doing and kind of tweaking them, or going into kind of new media and kind of different methodologies altogether in order to kind of push the stamps and see what they can do in kind of different settings and mediums and situations. All right, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, drop us a note in the comment section.